to this. Got it. Okay, yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and I will immediately start. I have a lot of things to say about this subject, so I hope I will not bore you. Please let me know if I'm too long. I would say something about the BBNJ agreement. I think I would be a little fast on that because I hear that some of you at least have been are familiar with the general history and content of the BBNJ agreement. I hear you have a lecture very recently about that. And then the interrelations with other bodies, because that's quite important in order to have this treaty to work. And there are a lot of other regimes that this treaty should interrelate with. I have taken some of them, the Convention on Biological Diversity and Fisheries Regime, IMO, and the Antarctic and Arctic bodies, you could say. That would be the treaties I will deal with, or the other bodies. Okay, let's just start it. As you know, as you have heard, there was this treaty adopted on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction in 2023, and that was a big moment for all of those that have followed and were interested in that, because it was after 20 years of negotiations it happened, and it was quite a touching moment. And this is the chairwoman of it all from Singapore, who were very happy and hadn't slept for 2 or 3 days at that time. And why do we need such a treaty? Just a little background is that 2/3 of the world seas are actually outside any jurisdiction of any state. Now on the map here, everything that's dark blue is actually beyond national jurisdiction. So it is a very, very big area. It's half of the world's surface actually, and there are not. It's beyond protection. Also, it's only 1% is protected, and because everybody thought that it is so big that it's beyond human reach. Even if there are some effects, you cannot really see it because it's so big. But that's actually not the case anymore. You now can see traces of or pieces of human influence, and yes, and then we have the oceans as a very big carbon sink also. And as I said, there is no coverage of protection of biodiversity. There are some very general provisions in the Convention on Law of the Seas generally, but it is anticipated when you made the Law of the Seas that these are to be filled out by more special treaties, and this is then one of those. And the main objectives is conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And that is already in the main objective. It says that this will happen through effective implementation of the provisions, and that is my subject, further international cooperation and coordination. So it cannot stand alone, this treaty. Okay, the history, I think maybe I'll not say so much about it, only that it was a very long history. It actually started already in 2005 with more than 10 years in one committee, then it came to another. And then in 2018, it was decided to negotiate an agreement, an implementing agreement, which is called under the Law of the Sea. And 6 meetings were held. It was a bit postponed by the coronavirus, but now finally it has been adopted in 2023 with 82 signatories. And actually now 2 states have ratified. Chile today I read has ratified as the second. I forgot what the first was. But there is still 58 ratifications needed for the treaty to come into force. Well, some of the main principles are really environmental law principles from the environmental law treaties, not so much from the law of the seas, the polluters pay principle, the freedom of the precautionary principle, ecosystem approach, integrated ocean management. And then very lately, there was also an approach on ecosystem resilience and reference to the effects of climate change and ocean acidification in order to restore ecosystems integrity, and that includes the carbon cycling services that underpins this role of the oceans. Actually, that element was not really present in the negotiations. It came in very late. There's not so much in the treaty itself about this. So these are some of the main principles, as I said, mostly from the environmental side, not so much from the law of the sea side. The common heritage of mankind and the freedom of the high seas are, of course, relevant here. They are somehow contradictory, you could say, in a way. I'll come back to that. And from the very start, or not from the very start, but from very early in the process here, there were four things that this treaty was, or the negotiations were to deal with: area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, environmental impact assessment, marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. And that part was very much because in the Convention on Biological Diversity, this is a very important part. So this should also be here in the treaty for beyond national jurisdiction. And then capacity building and transfer of marine technology was the fourth area that should be covered. And this is actually what is covered in the treaty. There could have been a lot more, but these are the four issues that are covered. And the one, I think I would not say so much about each of these areas, just to say about marine genetic resources, that this was very important for developing countries to have that. As in the Convention on Biological Diversity, they said if we are to commit ourselves to protect the oceans, we'd like to have a share of the benefits of the value you have in the oceans. And those are microorganisms, animals, genetic resources that could be used for different purposes, which are not even known yet. They are still subject to research, but it is anticipated that there is a very, very big economic potential for different products to be developed from marine genetic resources. In the Convention on Biological Diversity, you have a system that the state owns the genetic resources, and then if others get access, they should somehow negotiate a benefit sharing deal. Here you cannot have that because we all owe the oceans and the living resources there. So that's why there was and that was the most difficult part to negotiate. Actually, was a deal on marine genetic resources. I think I would only say talk about the last bullet here, that there is now a financial multilateral mechanism for monetary benefits to be further developed in this treaty here, with contributions from developed countries. And then there is a system for notification of different types of bioprospecting. It's called bioprospecting when you use the genetic resources and for sharing of the benefits. And so if you have questions about, I can come back to that, but it's quite a big and complicated issue to deal with, and I'm not sure whether this is what you are mostly interested in. But it was very important, and it was the last issue to be resolved in the negotiations. What is more known is that the treaty deals with protected areas and other area-based management tools. And that is, of course, very important, that there are this possibility to protect areas now in areas beyond national jurisdiction through each country could bring in proposals that should be reviewed by the scientific and technical body that is established under the treaty. Then there would be a process, and then there would be, in the end, there would be a decisions by the COP, Conference of the Parties. And that is actually an area where cooperation with other bodies are very much required. So this is quite important. It's also important to have a system of environmental impact assessment. And that is it's actually up to the states that carry out the activity to do this environmental impact assessment. It's not the treaty itself that does it, but you should. It's the flag state, you could say, that is doing that, and the system is like so much here of the provisions. They are to be further developed in the process that will follow, because there's a lot that is left to the Conference of the Parties. The strategic environmental assessment, I should probably know that is not assessment of project, but assessment of big programs and policies. And in the last hour, you could say, or very late in the process, this was also included in the treaty, that you need to make strategic environmental assessments of policies that affect the marine areas beyond national jurisdiction, and that is actually quite important. Capacity building, there's a lot of things that needs to be further developed here, but it's of course mostly for the benefit of developing countries. Capacity building from developed to developing countries is to be carried out. Okay, then about coming to the main subject about the relations to other bodies and instruments. What was in order for this negotiation to get started, countries had to agree that this treaty should not undermine other legal instruments. But what is meant by undermining? It's somehow anticipate that there is a conflict. And it was, but it was very important that this was that there should not be this that the other treaties should also still be in function. They should not undermine, and that was in the end there was some kind of de-dramatization of the concept, and instead of talking about these conflicts, about what this treaty being in conflict with others and not undermining, there was more focus on that maybe this treaty goes in the right direction, and it goes in the same direction as every treaty should do, that we need to protect the marine environment for all purposes, for shipping, for fisheries, for everything. So there is not so much undermining, that this treaty goes in the right direction, and we should other treaties should go in the same direction. So in the end, it was said, still repeated, that the treaty should not undermine, but it should also promote coherence and coordination with these instruments and bodies. So there was this positive message also sent in the treaty in the end, which I think is very good. And as you will hear now later, I don't see there is these big conflicts as it was anticipated in the start of the process. Okay, then I come to the interplay with other treaties, starting with the Convention on Biological Diversity. When we have a global convention on biodiversity, why do we need one for one more, you could say? This is because from the start, from 2005, there was no the law of the sea lawyers and the law of the sea representative. They didn't accept that this treaty should deal with areas beyond the sea, areas beyond national jurisdiction. It deals with areas within national jurisdiction. So there was a kind of a conflict early in 2005 that CBD tried to have influence here, but was rejected by. And then maybe that was a trigger for the process under the UNCLOS to start. So maybe it was good. So in the end, there was a lot of discussion and negotiations about sharing competences here, and the CBD in the end got a competence to have a scientific and, where appropriate, technical role on high seas protection, but not anything about management or anything. And under that, there was a concept being invented under the CBD about ecological and biological significant marine areas, EPSAs. And they've actually been developed. That's a big success of the CBD, that they have describing so many, more than 300 areas, and many of them, or at least not many, some of them are beyond national jurisdiction, that are areas that are somehow especially important. They are not protected areas per se. They have only been designated as such. But of course, you need some technical and scientific advice to designate protected areas under the treaty. And of course, this process under the CBD is quite important then, that you already have description of so many areas that are in need of protection. But otherwise, in the negotiation process of the BBNJ, it didn't talk much about this CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. It was as if it was kind of ignored that there was this one, also the EPSAs. But then finally, when the treaty was adopted, it was praised for its potential role of meeting the global target that was adopted under the CBD, that 30% of marine areas should be protected by 2030. That includes 10% strictly. So then there was this link established. But as I said, hopefully there would be a kind of a collaboration here with this convention. To the right, you see these EPSAs I was talking about. They are mapped in as dark blue here. This was the biggest, when we talk about undermining and conflicting with other regimes, was very much about fisheries regime. There is still a lot of people from the fisheries agreement that maybe see this convention as a threat, but there are big gaps in the global coverage of fisheries regime. So what about those areas? And there is now an acknowledgement in fisheries agreement that they should follow an ecosystem approach, which is also the BBNJ agreement. And then, yeah, we have to see. I hope there would be a kind of agreement with these regional fisheries agreements. And there is examples about regional seas programs, environmental protection, and regional and fisheries agreement around the world. So hopefully there is a basis here. Of course, if you have protected areas and it's doesn't take fishery into account, since overfishing is the biggest threat for the marine ecosystem, then of course there's a problem. So there must be some kind of liaison and collaboration with fisheries agreement. IMO is about shipping, while the IMO was very much focused on very technical issues, very sectorial. There is now also in IMO, there is a recognition of environmental protection and ecosystem protection. And there is a clear interface because under the IMO, you have these designation of particularly sensitive sea areas. And they have shown to be very important. But so far, there are no of those in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is, of course, something that could, if not needed already, could be needed if we have areas where shipping could cause a threat to marine areas beyond national jurisdiction. So maybe there would be a situation where the BBNJ agreement and the IMO could work together on this, because if you, again, this is an area where you need to collaborate if fishing is involved in the question of a protected area. The Antarctic Treaty System, that's I don't know how much you have dealt with that, but that is, I don't have time to talk about it from the beginning, but this is a bit also beyond national jurisdiction, as you probably know. And it's a system that already addresses very well, you could say, the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. There are large protected areas designated under this treaty in marine areas around the how much? Oh, it's already half. So I think I would go a little quicker now, and maybe not talk so much about that, except that I think here there is also that this Antarctic Treaty could probably work outside the BBNJ agreement. It has very similar objectives about protection of the marine environment, actually that is an agreement which I think could live well together and in cooperation also with the BBNJ agreement. That's just some of the protected areas around. It's the world's largest protected areas, actually marine protected areas, some of them. There are some process of designating more here, and it's a problem mainly because of the situation with Russia, but that's another story. Then when it comes to Arctic issue, this is relevant because the Central Arctic Ocean is beyond national jurisdiction, and it has quite a special location because it's surrounded by these 5 coastal states. It's relevant also because the Arctic Ocean is rich in biodiversity and very vulnerable to human activities and environmental change. We have the melting of the ice in that area. And the Arctic Council, which is not really functioning very well for the time being, has adopted an ecosystem approach as the overall framework. And they have actually done a lot of scientific and assessment work that has laid the ground for marine protected areas in that area. And actually, there is a treaty for the Central Arctic Ocean on fisheries that actually makes a moratorium, a prohibition of fisheries for many years. But what about the other human activities that could be there? There is a very fragmented framework for the Central Arctic Ocean there. And even if the 5 coastal states have claimed to have the stewardship over the Central Arctic Oceans, there isn't really a comprehensive ecosystem-based protection regime of the ocean there. And I would say that the BBNJ agreement could be an incentive for these Arctic states. I don't really take into consideration the situation with Russia, because that creates a big problem, of course, for the Arctic Ocean and for this treaty and everything. But in the best of worlds, where we have peace with Russia again, the BBNJ agreement could be an incentive to have a regional peace program and a kind of, or a treaty that comprehensively protect the ocean in accordance with the ecosystem approach. It will not be something that will be done without the involvement of the coastal states. They would be involved. Nothing will happen without their consent. So the treaty will not be a treaty that will impose something on them. But there would be a lot of attention to the Arctic Ocean. There's already been. So this treaty could somehow be a trigger for action. You could hope. This is the Central Arctic Ocean here. Some of it is within national jurisdiction. It's only the central part that is beyond. Okay, then I will come to the conclusion. I think the BBNJ agreement is important because it does away with this very fragmented and outdated approach to ocean governments, because it has an integrated and ecosystem-oriented whole cross-sectoral legal framework that and that reflects some of the modern approaches to ocean governance and connectivity. It has its own decision power over areas beyond national jurisdiction, but again, it could not work in isolation. It will be fully dependent on reaching out and collaborating with other international frameworks and bodies, which is also part of the ecosystem approach, to be holistic and cross-sectoral. In my view, but that is up for discussion, it really does not undermine other international framework or bodies, since they, in the end, they rely on the same objective to, we all need these healthy ocean ecosystems also for collecting the resources that are there. It could be mutually reinforcing with the Antarctic Treaty on Conservation and Sustainable Use. And it could, and in my view, it should inspire Arctic states to take their claim stewardship, the 5 states, they say they're stewards, to take it seriously and actually make some kind of better protection of the Arctic Ocean. And with those, that would be my final word here. I'm very open to questions, and it's still only, I know we have an hour, so there is still some time left. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question, if I can start, because now we can start with the discussion. So if somebody has a question, you can write it in a chat, or you can ask directly. So I wonder, what do you think, how the collaboration between the bodies under the BBNJ and RFMOs will look like in future? Because
Yeah,
I feeling that
I think when I make a kind of a very positive picture about this, about the potential to cooperate with other bodies, but on the most problematic area will probably be on the regional fisheries organizations. First of all, I think maybe the treaty could be an incentive to cover those areas of the world global oceans that are not covered by fishery agreements, that there would be some kind of agreements there on fisheries and other things. So it will be, there would be a kind of ecosystem protection also there. But I think when we come to the North Atlantic, our area or your area, where there is the OSPAR Convention, Regional Seas Convention on Protection of the Marine Environment, and the regionals, now I suddenly forgot what the regional, the RFMO for the North Atlantic, East Atlantic is. Yeah, but you know, probably you know it. They have made an agreement on working together on, yeah, you could say sustainable fisheries and protection of the marine environment. And I guess in other parts of the world, there are also a similar movement. So there are examples of those environmental protection and fisheries agreements working together that could serve as a model also on the global scale, and on how different those two type of bodies could work together. I actually, so I really hope, I cannot guarantee that it will happen and it will go smoothless, but since we have this big crisis, and since there is this recognition that that the oceans are very much under threat, and that fish stocks have been depleted, and that is because the ecosystem is not functioning very well. I think there must be a kind of general recognition that we have a common job to do in restoring the oceans. It's not the fisheries community and the rest is not two different bodies. They really need to work together on doing that, and I think there is a growing recognition of that. Biodiversity and ecosystems is also important for sustainable fishery.
Thank you for this answer, but don't you think that political interest will be too present for the future? So it will be barriers for the development or of a good cooperation between RFMOs and
yes. I'm trying to be optimistic, because sometimes talking about things in an optimistic way could help. Not that I'm overestimating my own role, but sometimes you could, when you talk it, you can talk things up, or you can talk things up. And trying to talk things up, yes, there could be political problems, and there could be pressure from fishery lobby against protective measures. I can only say, and I hope it's recognized, that this would be very short-sighted political pressure that will not be sustainable, and it will not be in the long-time interest of the fishery industry either, because they are also in need of healthy ecosystems to not fish down fish stocks. That is, I cannot really predict the future, but I just hope, as I said, that this realized. I think the fisheries has also moved. They have also moved their approach to ecosystem approach that's not just looking at one fish species and its status, but also try to see the whole ecosystem as this approach of the treaty does. So I can only hope that there would not be this kind of short-sighted resistance against protection and marine protected areas, and taking care of the whole ecosystem instead of just looking at isolated fish stocks.
Yes, very optimistic. I really hope so as well. But when we see what is happening at the parliament, for instance, and the commission, for instance, all the fishing lobbies that are present and that are always blocking the laws, and like for instance, Spain that has many interest in fisheries, they're always there to block every time there is a new law that should be
Yeah,
passed. So
I
I hope,
agree with that, and they are also some of their fishery fleets. They go very far to find the fish stocks. I agree with that, but it's a very delicate political question. And I also agree, but I still think that I still think that the EU and their approach and their common EU policy on fisheries, even if it's not perfect, and even if you have countries, big fishery nations like Spain, I think you could also include Norway as a very, very big fishery nation that has sometimes lobbied against environmental interests on fisheries, but that's another issue. The EU is also paving a way through its policy on integration of the ecosystem approach in fisheries, and at least a better attempt than in many other parts of the world to integrate fisheries with fisheries concerns with environmental concerns. So in many ways, on environmental issues, I think the EU is paving the way, and I hope that could also be the case here. I don't know how Spain will react, but they were also quite committed to this treaty here. I know.
okay, that's great. So we can be optimistic. Let's say for the future, there is hope. Can I just ask you a question? Do you think it would be possible for you to stop sharing your screen so we see you in big and we don't have your screen anymore?
Of course.
Great. And then we have a question from the audience. Okay, amazing. And then Louise has a question for you.
Yeah, I do have one question. I was wondering about the area-based management tool. So if we, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood it as tools in order to be able to conserve biodiversity with the help of the RFMOs. So it would be more in the view of conserving marine ecosystem. And I was wondering whether restoring ecosystem would be able to fit within these area-based management tool, since if we consider RFMO, they're more inclined to conserve the fish stock, but not currently, at least not currently to restore it. So is there any space for restoration aims in this new BBNJ in light of this area-based management tools?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a counter question to you. What kind of restoration were you envisaging when it comes to marine areas? When it comes to marine areas beyond national jurisdiction, what restoration measures could we think about?
Well, for example, there is passive restoration, but also active. I've seen that passive restoration is, for example, prohibiting bottom trawling, but I guess in the high sea, maybe that's already the case. But I saw that some RFMO do have those prohibition. And as example of restoration per se, I have no clue yet what about it, but I've heard some talk about this implication of restoration in BBNJ. and the implication between the two. And I was wondering whether you had any thought of that, but I haven't dig it up yet.
No, I haven't had so much thoughts, but I think your question was interesting because now it reminds me that restoration was not an issue. That I'm not sure it's restoration is mentioned in the treaty at all, and I don't remember it as being an issue in the negotiation leading to the treaty. And that's why I asked what you could imagine. I guess that while in the CBD, I also follow on biodiversity on land and in low and in more shallow in coastal waters. There's a lot about restoration, active part, but I guess that here it's because it's you envisage it's very high. It is areas beyond national jurisdiction are all with very high ocean depth. So there's not something so much you can do, and actually, the protection of the oceans or protective measures like that could be prohibition of bottom trawling, and so it's a kind of it's not restoration; it's a protective measure which somehow will restore the ecosystem if it functions as it's envisaged, So in that way, there is maybe a kind of an overlap here between conservation and restoration. I don't think there's something. I cannot think about something very active you could do as as you can on land and in the low waters of restoration. So I think when you conserve a marine ecosystem here in marine areas beyond national jurisdiction, you would somehow hopefully restore the ecosystem also.
And I have one question following my latter one. I was wondering about wildlife. So obviously, when we talk about RFMO, it is more conservation of fish stock, I would say. But what about wildlife? Is the BBNJ supposed to enhance the conservation of wildlife, or hasn't it come up in the negotiation?
It was not wildlife was not it's biodiversity, and there was a lot about talk. There's been a lot of talk about fish and fish stocks, but and not so much about wildlife. I think it's because wildlife is, of course, other type of wildlife is, of course, covered by biodiversity. So implicitly, of course, when you have protected areas and you have environmental impacts assessments, they would also need to take in consideration other types of animals and life than fish, of course. There is one question which I'm not quite. There is one issue which may be controversial and where there may be some discussions would be on whales. That's really a type of whale, but because as you know, there is already a global regime, the International Whaling Convention, that is very old, that somehow deals with whales and has a very interesting story because it started as a fisheries agreement, a fishery on whales about how many whales you can kill, and so now it has actually developed to some extent into a conservation of whale instrument, to some extent at least. But probably that treaty will have to not to be undermined. It will have prevalence over the BBNJ agreement, you could say, but still there could be some cooperation about protected areas where you also protect whales whales, it's only big whales that's covered by that. Then there are all the small whales, cetaceans. They would not be covered. They would not be covered by the whaling convention. But coming back to your questions, yes, wildlife is very much a part of the protection of the biodiversity.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you for this answer. Is there any other question in the audience?
I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question with regard to the environmental impact assessment part. And if we compare with the domestic environmental impact assessment, always there's like the entity and the company that proposed the project that present all the documentation with regard to the environmental impact assessment, and then the authority which decide whether the project can be carried out or not. So it takes the final decision with regard to the impact assessment. But here in the BBNJ agreement, these two entities sort of, there's the state which represent both. So there's the state which present the impact assessment and also the state that takes the decision. Is not the risk about a biased decision? So the state presenting all the documentation for the impact assessment already have some, I don't know, like having like already some decision on how the final decision will be performed?
Yeah, I think your point is very, I think you're valid. At some stage of the negotiation, it was actually, there were proposals on having a multilateral mechanism for EIA. So it was the treaty body that carried out the environmental impact assessment. That was not accepted. That would, of course, have been stronger. If it was a kind of a completely neutral body under some guidelines about instructions by the parties on how to conduct EIA that does it, and not something left to the individual countries to take responsibility for. I agree. Hopefully there would be some kind of discussions about that in the follow-up, and there would be some clear guidelines on how to carry out the EIA, because it's not just a question of bad will. It could also be some countries that lack the capacity to do a proper EIA. And hopefully for them, there would be some kind of capacity help building projects to do that. And then there would be a kind of evaluation of the EIAs by the parties, the scientific technical body, and the COP, to see whether these EIA are carried out well, and there would be some reaction from their side if they are not done well. And but anyway, there is this risk. You don't have a neutral body. You will have each country will have to do it, but we will just have to wait and see how it's carried out. There would be some pressure, and there would be some interest in countries to do the work well, I would say. So it's also very much a question for non-governmental organizations and the public to have some oversight here. But it's a very relevant question you raise.
Thank you for this question, Greta. And thank you for this answer, Christian. I guess we can wrap it up if there is no other question in the meeting. Thank you very much for this presentation. It was very enlightful. I hope we all had a great time. And I guess we see each other for our next event on the 7th of March.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I see you, but it was nice to see you here, although I didn't see you, and it was nice to participate. So thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you very much for coming, Chrissy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.